out, guys. As many of you know, I'm Molly O'Brien, running for Assembly for District 17. That's New Brunswick, North Brunswick, Milltown, Piscataway, and Franklin. You can vote for me November 3rd with the Green Party. We have a few other Green candidates here running in local elections. Steve Zielinski, he's out here running for District 12. And Steve Welker, the founder of the Green Party in New Jersey. He's running for District 14. And of course, Dr. Jill Stein is here, who's running for President of the United States. Thank you so much for coming out. Dr. Jill Stein received her PhD at Harvard Medical School, and she's a mother of two, still has her medical license, but she's, according to her, she now practices political medicine because that is the mother of all illnesses, right? That's what you say. So I'm so happy to have her here. It's a funny story how we met. I met her as a reporter for New Brunswick Today, which is a local paper that covers municipal news and state news, and I had heard of Jill Stein's visit to New Brunswick for the Green Party of New Jersey annual convention, and I didn't know too much about the Green Party. I thought it was associated mainly with legalizing marijuana or decriminalizing it, which I do support. But it's much more than that. Jill sat right down with me for an interview, and we spoke about a lot. She told me about a lot of issues that I care about, like the environment, and she spoke about the terrible deal that between the Christie administration and ExxonMobil, where they were responsible for $9 billion of damages to their Bayonne and Linden sites. This year, they only got away, they paid $225 million. It was really terrible, and that really resonated with me when you mentioned that Christie is a criminal. And you mentioned so many other things, like the Malcolm X grassroots movement and how we need to fight against racial discrimination, not only in our police departments and our justice system, but in our school system as well, and the housing market. And you spoke of so many things that really resonated with me, and then you told me to run for state representative, and I never wound up writing the story. I kind of just used what you told me as fodder for my campaign. And without further ado, please welcome Jill Stein.
Hey.
So thank you so much to Molly, thank you to all the candidates, thank you to you all for coming out today. One of the reasons I'm running is in order to empower and activate people like Molly. And to me it's like endlessly inspiring that we sat down and we had a conversation. And can I say this publicly?
It was initially off the record.
It wasn't that. Is it still off the record?
No,
okay. So at the time, Molly was going to run for the Democratic Town Committee.
Right.
And after we had this half-hour interview, this really heart-to-heart conversation about where the world was going, the hell in a handbasket, basically, Molly said to me, so I have to tell you something. I was about to submit my name to run for a Democratic Town Committee. Do you think I should do that? And basically what I said was, the clock is ticking. We don't have time. We don't have time for a whole new crop of young people to go through what people went through with Barack Obama, sort of the hope and change, and then to discover that things really don't change inside the Democratic Party because it's funded and paid for by Wall Street and big corporations. So you have the illusion of progress, but you don't actually get progress. So I said to Molly, no, don't run for Democratic Town Committee. You should join those other young people over there. We were having a Green Party of New Jersey meeting, and submit your name and run for state representative. And I was just blown away that she said, okay, I'm going to do that. And it went like that. To me, that is the hope of the next generation. I'll just say a few words about the campaign and why it is such a magical moment that we're in, this magical transformative moment. It's a moment of crisis, but it's also a moment of incredible uprising and transformation. So, there are thriving movements right now that are pushing for change in the street, but what we're lacking is a political voice that can actually make that change. And the amazing thing is when you add these movements up, these movements for living wages, the Fight for 15, the movements for climate justice, for 100% clean renewable energy now, when you add up the young people, the students, 40 million millennials who are in debt without a way to repay it. When you add the one in every 3 African American men who's basically held hostage by the prison state and the drug wars and has had sort of mistreatment at the hands of the criminal justice system. That's 1 out of 3. And every, I think it's now 28 hours, a person of color is murdered, basically, in a police or vigilante, racist killing. The numbers go on, and after a while you look at them and you say, wow, 40 million millennials, 1 in 3 African Americans, actually 1 in 2 American families, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, is in poverty or low income and heading for poverty right now. You add those numbers up, and it's a terrible thing that these struggles are going on, but the flip side of that is that we have a clear majority here of people who are really being beat up by the system. And if those people came out to vote to actually change our politics, to change who's leading the fight here, or the lack of fight, who's at the helm of our political establishment, we would actually have the numbers to win. And consider this, 40 million millennials alone, if they got word out on the street that millennials can actually decide this election, millennials who want to abolish debt could come out and check the green box in November of 2016, and it would be goodbye to student debt. Think that's a good idea? And of course, we need to make public higher education free, but that's not enough, because there's an entire generation which is basically being held hostage right now by debt. And we see, new data every day about how debt has really disabled the American economy. And we're not going forward while an entire generation is being basically held in hostage, held as indentured servants without jobs that can repay that debt, which is the flip side of this economic crisis. It's not only that you have people in debt, and by the way, it's not only 40 million students. Turns out, this blew me away, I come across this data yesterday, 35% of all Americans who have credit cards are in collection. 35% of Americans are in collection on credit cards. Add to that, 35% of household wealth was lost in the last 10 years. So they talk about how we're in a recovery. We're not in a recovery. We are in an emergency. And those unemployment numbers that have come down, they've come down because we have part-time, temporary, low-wage jobs. That's why those numbers are coming down. 4 in 10 American workers now are basically part of the so-called gig economy, living from job to job with temporary and part-time jobs that don't pay, that don't pay a living wage and don't allow you benefits or security or health care. So we've got these struggles out on the street right now. We have the numbers. What people don't know is that there is a way to actually fix this. It's not rocket science. We can fix the economy. We can ensure that everyone has the right to a job. at living wages, we can put 20 million people back to work now in good jobs that contribute to our community, that green our economy, and that push back on climate change and turn the tide. We call this a Green New Deal. It's like the New Deal that got us out of the Depression, but it's also green, so it not only uplifts our economy, it also deals with the climate crisis, which is rolling out before our very eyes. And we heard Obama's recent plan, which is, to just bring down our coal plant pollution by some 30% or so by 2030 or whenever it is. But this is such a drop in the bucket while they keep going in the wrong direction between the fracking, the offshore oil, the exploration of the Arctic, which is basically the devastation of the Arctic. This is stuff that we can't afford to sit back and allow to happen. We cannot. Not on the economy and not on the climate. The more I learn about this, and this is one of those, one of the benefits of running for office is that you get to spend a lot of time just looking at what's happening in the world and talking to people and following the news. And one of the things that you see is that we've basically run into the brick wall on climate. Did people hear about Jim Hansen's study that was released a week ago? Jim Hansen is like the foremost climate scientist, certainly in North America, arguably in the whole world. He's the NASA scientist who basically alerted the world to this in 1980. And he's always been ahead of the curve, and he's always had very sobering news, and he's always been right. And what he's saying now is that the ice sheets are actually melting at 10 times the rate of what the science predicted, and we have basically a couple decades to zero out our climate emissions. A couple decades before we basically see sea level rise. He's talking about 10 feet as soon as 2050. 10 feet of sea level rise means goodbye Manhattan. It means goodbye to New Jersey shoreline. It's big time stuff, which is around the corner. It's in our lifetime. The climate catastrophe is getting out of the bag right now unless we stop it. But the great news is that we can stop it. And we can actually stop it like that in the blink of an eye in a way that helps our economy and actually makes wars for oil obsolete, because you don't need them anymore once you have 100% clean renewable energy right here at home. And it turns out it also makes us incredibly healthier when we don't have fossil fuel pollution and we're not eating industrial fossil fuel heavy food too. So it's actually a win-win-win. It's a win, that is the Green New Deal, is a win for jobs. We call for 20 million jobs as an emergency. When Pearl Harbor was bombed before the Second World War, before the U.S. entered the Second World War, it was declared a national emergency. And within 6 months, the economy had converted to a wartime footing. It took 6 months to change 25% of GDP to basically a wartime GDP. We need to do that now and create basically clean renewable energy. We can do that within 15 years. If they could create a war economy in 6 months, we can certainly create a green economy in the next 15 years. And by the way, let's put everyone back to work while we're doing it, because it turns out it actually pays for itself just in the health savings alone, from not breathing in the pollution, from not eating the bad, cheap industrial food, instead eating the food from a local, organic, sustainable, fresh food economy. We get so much healthier. This actually happened in the country of Cuba. When Cuba's oil pipeline went down in the 1990s with the collapse of the Soviet Union, all of a sudden Cuba had no fossil fuel. They were not burning any pollution into the air. It meant people had to start walking and biking, so suddenly you were using active transportation, but you could do it safely because the cars were no longer out there occupying the streets. Suddenly you have infinite space to go walking and biking. They had to take out the draft animals, and everybody got to work producing food in an organic food system. And their air got clean. And what do you think happened to their health? They're in a complete economic crisis. You'd think everybody would be stressed out. What happened to their health? Totally. Spending $0, okay? $0 is what they spent on this. This was all the result of moving to clean energy. Their death rates from diabetes went down 50%. Their obesity rates went down 50%. Their death rates from heart attacks and strokes went down 25 to 35%. They did that with $0. You know how much we spend on health care every year? And I should say it's not really health care, it's sick care. Because we make people sick, and then we've got this corporate system that makes a lot of money throwing pills and procedures at people, but not really getting you better if you've encountered any of these diseases. And by the way, I say as a medical doctor here, I know the statistics, half of all adults have a chronic disease now. That's where our lovely economy has brought us. 1 out of every 2 adults is fighting a chronic disease, and the age group gets younger and younger all the time. So it's not working. So we are spending not $1 trillion, not $2 trillion, we're spending $3 trillion every year on a sick care system that is not making us better. It's making CEOs of insurance companies rich, and it's making pharmaceutical companies very rich too, but it's not making us better. So we're spending $3 trillion a year to basically get sicker. Cuba spent $0, and everybody got healthier, spending nothing simply by moving to a clean energy and a sustainable organic food system and public transportation where walking and biking was something you could actually do. So you didn't have to go out and spend $1,000 to join a health club and then go drive there, you know, in order to exercise. You actually had the roads and the sidewalks and safe places to get your exercise while you got to public transportation. That's the transportation system we exist, that we deserve. We deserve for that transportation system to exist. And it can exist when we demand it. They tell us that we don't, that we can't afford it, but actually we can afford it and will in fact save money. And the other point here was that moving to 100% clean renewable energy also makes these wars for oil obsolete. Because what's been happening on these wars for oil? We got more of them all the time. This war against Saddam Hussein, and that outrageous invasion because of weapons of mass destruction that did not exist, which was a lie. Those wars, continue. Where did we get? We spent $5 trillion on Iraq and Afghanistan. $5 trillion. Over 1 million people were killed, largely civilians, black and brown people for the most part, were killed in the Middle East, and that's just in Iraq alone. That doesn't include all the others. Massive deaths, and we did what all the terrorists in the world can't do. We became our own worst enemy and recruited all kinds of people to groups that are our sworn enemies, because we just bomb the hell out of them. This is our military policy, is to bomb the hell out of them. And it just creates one group after another, which get more and more radical. So the solution, by the way, because the question always comes up, so what are you going to do about ISIS? You know what? You don't have to bomb ISIS, because you can't bomb ISIS. You're going to bomb lots of civilians. It's like the Vietnam War all over again. All that bombing did no good in the Vietnam War, it just killed millions of people. You can actually starve ISIS. How do you do that? Because it's our allies that are financing ISIS, that are buying the oil on the black market that ISIS is selling. We can stop purchasing that oil and get our allies to stop purchasing that oil. And we can stop shipping arms to the Middle East and either weaponizing ISIS indirectly or arming everybody else who then leaves their weapons on the field and they go to ISIS. You know, your friend today, the warlord who's your friend today is not going to be your friend tomorrow, and you don't win these wars by going in and arming all the warlords that are out there and trying to bribe them to be on your side. We've seen this policy fail over and over again, and Afghanistan is another example of that. So we can actually cut off the flow of money, arms, oil, and militias, which are crossing borders from our allies like Turkey, and stop the flow of support. So the point here is that there are solutions to these problems. They like to talk us, that is, the powers that be want to talk us into thinking that there's no way forward, that we have to surrender ourselves to more of the same when it's already been a flagrant failure on war policy, on trade policy. They're trying to foist another corporate trade agreement on us in the form of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. More corporate health care we could have, and we deserve a Medicare for all single-payer system right now. It's absolutely inexcusable that we don't have that. That too would be saving us. You know how much money? We can afford to give everybody care, but by cutting out the waste and the profiteering by the private massive health insurance bureaucracy, we save almost $500 billion a year by giving care to everyone. And that's lifelong wraparound care that includes mental health care and dental care and eyes and ears and all those things that are forever not being covered. So that is a fixable problem. As part of this Green New Deal to, in one fell swoop, fix the crisis in our economy, in the climate, in foreign policy, and make wars for oil obsolete, and massively improve our health. There's another crisis of racial justice right now that we're reading about every day with each recent outrageous murder that we're reading about in the news. From Baltimore to Ferguson to New York and Eric Garner, you know, the list just goes on, and Sandra Bland. It's one incredible tragedy after the other. It doesn't have to be that way either, and we shouldn't feel like we have to ask for just one little solution, like police review boards, which we need. We need citizen review boards that control our policing, that that ensure that citizens have the right to hire and to fire not only police but also our district attorneys. We also have a right to investigators who are there already before trouble happens, so you don't have to wait for the appointment of a special prosecutor. We should have them ready to go to investigate all cases of police brutality and murders that occur in police custody or at the hands of police. Because this is entirely unacceptable. And the problem is not limited to violence in policing or in the criminal justice system. There's violence, there's economic violence, that is racial economic violence. The average African American family used to have 10 cents on the dollar for the wealth of a Caucasian family. 10 cents for $1. That is 1/10 of the wealth. And over the last 10 years, that has been decreased from 10 cents on the dollar to 5 cents on the dollar. So you can see things are not moving in the right direction. Even under a Democratic White House with 2 houses of Congress for the first 2 years that were in Democratic hands. So it cannot be blamed on the Republicans. Under Democratic control, the same problems occurred. So that issue of economic violence is very much alive and needs to be fixed. Education, disparities in education. are a form of violence as well, a form of racial violence. And if you look at where schools have been closed in this crazy system of high-stakes testing and then closing and privatizing schools, that's been going on largely in low-income communities of color. And we know now that the data is in that that doesn't work. It's actually harmful. It's not helpful. And who created these policies to start with? Not educators, not people who understand what education is about. This was basically created by investors. You know, this was created by Bill Gates and what's his name? Obama's education czar, Arne Duncan. Yes, this was their policy. And Rahm Emanuel has been a big part of this as well. These are not people, these are people out of finance, you know. These are not people out of education who understand the first thing about how people learn, let alone how children learn. It's not the business model in our schools, yet a business model has been applied, and it's been most harmful to communities of color. So we can fix this. It's not rocket science how to teach our kids. We need well-funded public schools, and we need to stop the privatization and stop the high-stakes testing. And while we're at it, by the way, we need to stop the privatization of higher education as well, because that is also, you know, making mincemeat out of our colleges. And we can make public higher education free. For God's sake, my generation grew up with that. Why is today's generation less deserving? Not one bit. So we need to make public higher education free. When we make the publics free, the cost of the private schools come down as well, because they have to be competitive. And it's outrageous. I saw in, I think I saw it in the New Brunswick Times. Did I read this article there about how the cost of tuition has just gone up? 2.4% at Rutgers. And what is it, $700 every year out of that tuition is going for sports facilities. Oh my God. Yeah, so it's like inside of this privatized system, you have all this competition for the money, basically, for students with money. And so, you know, you have these gorgeous health clubs and you know, and athletic stadiums that are being built. And that's driving up the cost of tuition and putting an entire generation in debt as the economy, you know, the economy that was sacked by Wall Street in 2008, thanks to their gambling, their betting, their dishonest investments, their investment instruments. So the economy got sacked, yet we bailed them out. You know, we bailed out Wall Street to the tune of now $14 trillion and counting. So how about we bail out the students and make higher education free? For starters. So bottom line here is that this is fixable. And there is a political vacuum right now. In 2014, anybody remember how many people came out to vote in 2014? It was like 37%. It was like the all-time low since the Second World War, when everybody was fighting a war. People are not coming out, and that's especially the Democratic Party base. It's labor, it's women, immigrants, youth, not coming out to vote because the Democratic Party has basically sold out. And this business about voting for the lesser evil because you have to be so afraid of standing up, you know. So we get these lesser evils, and what did we get with this politics of fear that tells you you have to be too afraid to stand up for what you need? That politics of fear delivered everything we were afraid of. All the reasons you were supposed to compromise your vote and make that, you know, that lesser evil vote because you didn't want an expanding war. Well, we got plenty of expanding war. You didn't want deportations of immigrants. Well, that's gone through the roof. Not only deportations, but now these outrageous detentions down in Texas where mothers and children are being detained. And the Department of Justice, not the Department of Justice, but a court, a Texas court actually said, you got to close those facilities. These are human rights violations. And the Obama Justice Department, just last week, responded by saying, no, we're not going to close them. So now we're going to have a court battle about this. It's just outrageous. This abuse of immigrants continues to go on. And by the way, you know, what are immigrants other than economic and political refugees from horrible policies and U.S. interventions that are driving people out of their homes and out of their jobs and coming here as a last resort? So we can fix the immigration crisis at its roots by ceasing these policies that create economic and political refugees in the first place. And that includes no more NAFTA. We need to go back to drawing boards on NAFTA and TPP because they put millions of farmers out of work who've had nowhere else to go in order to feed their families. So we can solve these problems. The politics of fear delivered everything we were afraid of. It's time for us to stand up with the politics of courage. An example of the politics of courage is what happened in the 60s when people were standing up for civil rights, when people were standing up for the right to vote, when people were standing up to end the war in Vietnam and to create an environmental protection agency and a Clean Air Act and a Clean Water Act, standing up for women's right to choose and the right to have an abortion if a woman so needs and desires. And who exactly was president when all this happened? Richard Nixon. Which tells you, don't be afraid of the greater evil. Our power is our power. It's not the power of the lesser evil or the greater evil. It's our power of understanding what we have to do and our power to actually accomplish it. In the words of Alice Walker, the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we had it to start with. We knew it back in the 60s, and we did all those things. That's what we need to do again. We need to have our power in the street, in our workplaces, on our campuses. We need to have that power in the voting booth. You know, we need a rebellion, a peaceful rebellion. It's actually well underway. It's going on right now. We need to take that rebellion also into the voting booth and stand up. Forget the lesser evil. It's time to fight for the greater good. So I'll just wrap up saying that this election has been such a whirlwind and so very exciting. It's like we have just come, you know, it's like a 180 from what it was in 2012 when we were fighting just to be heard. Now suddenly we and the Green Party are really recognized as the voice of enduring opposition. So there's some opposition going on in the Democratic Party right now in Bernie Sanders' campaign, but regrettably there are certain structural things in the Democratic Party that will make it very hard for Bernie to last beyond February when Super Tuesday happens, which is basically the economics. It's the money primary when there are 25 or 30 primaries in one day. It takes a lot of money to run and succeed in that primary. And then you have superdelegates, which are the Democratic Party's way to make sure that it is the old boys who control who's actually going to get nominated. They actually have half the delegates belong to these superdelegates. So it doesn't really matter. The Democratic Party doesn't really care what people think or what people want, which is why, you know, if you support Bernie, good luck and sympathies. And I don't want to knock Bernie's campaign because there are good people who are really standing up on important issues. But it's also important to see where that campaign is going because it's not the first revolt inside the Democratic Party. You only have to look back to Howard Dean to see what happened to him, where they basically created this Dean scream hysteria in a smear campaign to pull him down for nothing, but he was becoming a threat, so they took him down. Same thing with Jesse Jackson. In the civil rights era, Jesse Jackson had a very powerful insurgent campaign, and they launched a smear campaign against him too, coming into the primary when he looked powerful, and they didn't have their superdelegates to keep him under wraps. And they basically launched a a smear public relations campaign that made him out to be an anti-Semite and to be a Jew hater and, quote, anti-Israel, which he was not, but they smeared him with that and brought him down to the poll. So the Democratic Party has a track record of how it deals with principled campaigns. And the rub is, while those principled campaigns are going on, the party keeps marching to the right, more and more into the hands of big money and corporations and the Trans-Pacific Partnership and big banks and big oil. So that's where the party is going, so it's important not to take your eye off the ball here, because it's clear where that ball is going. It's really important that we build the alternative. It's likely Bernie will be out by February, if not before, and his supporters are going to need a place to go. So for those of us who have our eyes on where we need to go, this incredible global emergency, and it falls to us, it's on our watch. It's our, it's our opportunity, it's our responsibility, and maybe it's our destiny to be here now at a time when the world is really coming apart at the seams, on our watch in every day imaginable. We really need a transformative change. That's what the Green Party is about. That's what our campaign is about. However far we get, and I don't rule out a win. I'm not holding my breath, but I'm not ruling it out. There are crazier things that have happened. You know, another Katrina, or the Democratic candidate flames out. You know, there are things like that that happen. So it's good to be there and to have staked a claim and clarified what is the agenda before this moment of utter turnaround happens, and that moment could happen at any time. If word gets out on the street to those 40 million millennials that they actually have the power to win this election and end student debt, 40 million millennials could show up. 40 million millennials is enough to win a three-way race. So there actually are strategies to win here. But however far we get, we keep building from there. Unlike insurgencies in the Democratic Party, when those end, they're over and they are expunged. They are basically disappeared from history and from the workings of the Democratic Party. But for us, as an insurgent third party, we will build and we will keep building. And we are aiming to get on the ballot in 50 states, to be running strong candidates like Molly O'Brien and to be supporting them and supporting more of you out there who are ready to run. You need support in order to run. And we support with campaigns, with volunteers, with database, with donors, with strategy. We can help people who are ready to run. We don't have the deep pockets of the hedge fund managers who are funding the Democratic Party or the pharmaceutical companies. We don't have those deep pockets. Thank goodness. We don't want those deep pockets. That's why we can be accountable to everyday people. And that's the kind of support that we can provide to candidates. And that's the kind of support we want to provide to everyday people. We want to lift up your voice so your voice can be heard and reflected in our agenda for people, planet, and peace over profit. This is our time. We're getting incredible coverage this time around from all sorts of journals that wouldn't touch us with a 10-foot pole first time around. We did our announcement on Democracy Now!, which welcomed us with open arms. Last time they didn't have us on until the very end of the campaign when we did a series of debates with them. Counterpunch did a great article that went viral. The women's magazine Elle did another great coverage. We're finding that when we get covered, we get incredible support, and those articles are going viral. We have a great website, which is jill2016.com. So I encourage you to be a part of the campaign, to join the team, whatever you're doing. The world is in a moment right now which is absolutely historic. For the crisis that we're facing and this moment of transition that we actually have in our hands. It is in our hands. Our future is literally in our hands. And in this campaign, we can really be front and center stage. We have a lawsuit. We actually have 2 lawsuits against the Commission on Presidential Debates. We're going to do our best to get into that debate. We actually have a pretty good track record with that. In my first race, when I was tricked into running for office for the first time, I debated Mitt Romney, running for governor of Massachusetts, and spoke up for these same kinds of things. Inside that TV studio, they went over but like lead balloons, but when I came out of the debate, I was mobbed by the press, who told me that I had won the debate on the Instant Online Viewer poll. So that tells you where we go with debate. So there are all kinds of things happening this time around that make it just an unparalleled, historic, and life-changing opportunity. And I really encourage you to join in and be a part of it. And let's stand up and forget the lesser evil and fight like hell for the greater good. We need to fight like our lives depend on it, because in fact they really do. Thank you. So I just wanted to say that we are collecting campaign donations for those who are able to make a contribution. And in the last race, we qualified for matching funds, where the feds basically matched dollar for dollar every contribution up to $250. So in the last campaign, we made over $1 million. And we qualified at the very last possible moment, because it took a while for people to take the campaign seriously. This time, we are actually well on our way to qualifying at a historic early date. It'll be the soonest in any campaign cycle that a third party has qualified for matching funds. And New Jersey, as I understand, is about halfway. I haven't seen the latest numbers, but a little more? Yeah. So it basically takes $5,000 for a state to qualify, and New Jersey is halfway there. So if we can raise about $2,000, something like that, we're there. And however far we get, it closes that gap. Once we've qualified, our money is basically doubled. That enables us to hire all the field organizers who are raring to go, to make sure that we have a 50-state ballot access drive, that we're on the ballot, that voters actually have a choice. Students can actually come out and vote to abolish debt in every state, which is where we need them. We can hire our student organizers. We can hire the organizers in the communities of color and the frontline communities. I should mention that one of our major deputy campaign managers is Kali Akuno with the Malcolm X grassroots movement, who's very involved in Black Lives Matter. I don't know if any of you have heard of Jackson Rising and this wonderful economic reform movement, basically for co-ops, worker co-ops in Jackson, Mississippi. So we have very strong representation from the Black Lives Matter movement and from the African American community in the campaign. Likewise from the immigrant rights movement and from the student movement. We're very networked with grassroots movements and networks that we would like to be able to hire and provide support to these organizers as they get out and get the word out to their communities and activate them. So by contributing to the campaign, you enable us to get to matching funds, and by getting to matching funds, it basically opens the floodgate to a lot of federal funding that enables us to be not only a competitive campaign, but a campaign that is on the ground in the frontline community, actually empowering people to lift up their voices and to lift up the fights that they are so heroically fighting now in the immigrant community and the communities of color and the student community and women's rights and the LGBT community. We want to be able to give these grassroots groups their voice and their choice in the election, and your support will help us do that. Now, I happen to know there's someone here, Richard Fuller. Do you want to say what you were going to say, Richard?
I so appreciate coming to New Jersey. Last year at our convention, this year at our convention, at Evelyn's Restaurant, up from College Avenue, and the Labor and Education Center on Rutgers campus yesterday. Here today, I promised you at our convention that I would have $250. I have it here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And Richard was going to challenge anyone else to see if they could match him. Anyone else who could come up with $250? All right. Oh, wonderful.
So
One,
those
two,
who are
oh, thank
willing
you.
to donate to Jill, even if you're not willing to donate $250, at whatever cost you're willing to give, we have a group set up here with Denise. We have a form to fill out. We'll process your payment. If you're willing to donate your time to Jill as a volunteer, we have volunteer forms at this table along with some other materials if you're interested. And then we have a DCNJ table if you're willing to get active with local DCNJ.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Can I ask you, Julie, would it be possible, can you raise your hand again if you were able to match that $250? Could you bring them forms? Could you bring them the forms where they are? And one for Richard. And then, let me see if there's anyone, I'm using the Ralph Nader technique here, which works pretty well for him. So, incredibly generous people who are able to dig very deep and contribute $250. Is there anyone here who could contribute $200? Anyone who could contribute $150? People are stretching. I know we got a lot of students here in the crowd.
Credit cards?
Yes, yes, we do. Anyone who could contribute $100? All right. Oh, thank you. Woohoo. Very generous.
Thank you. Disregard the opposite side as like recycled paper.
Anyone who could contribute $50? Oh, thank you so much. All right. Keep your hands up quickly. Oh, boy, thank you. And two over here. Thank you, Jen.
Here goes my paycheck at the state. You got pen or pencil?
And is there anyone who could come up with $25? Oh, great. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So, while everybody's filling out their forms, I will just give a big thank you to everyone and encourage you. Not everybody can give financially, but other people are giving every day in the work that you do for justice, in the work that you are doing for healthy food, for the environment, for racial justice, for our schools. So whatever you are doing, you are part of this. And if you can also give yourself political power, which is what I learned late in life, so most of you are way ahead of me. It took me till I was 50 to understand that you had to challenge power if you want to actually move this stuff forward. You have to be willing, like Frederick Douglass said, you have to be a threat. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will. So we need to make the demand politically. So I just want to thank everybody in this room who's been part of building the Green Party, and welcome those of you who are thinking about how can you change this outrageous, difficult situation you are grappling with. The name of the game is for us to fight together, and a political party is basically people who are working together across issues, across generations, across geography, and over time. We don't go away. The Green Party is that coalition that we need to seize our power and take back the healthy, just, secure future that is within our reach. Thank you all so very much. Sure, if you'd like to, yeah. Questions? Steve, do you wanna do the? You wanna?
Yeah, sure. Lawrence, question?
Yeah, I want in 2 minutes. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't want to monopolize time, but I'll keep it make it
Very
2
short.
minutes.
I'd like make it 30 seconds. 30 seconds left. Because people have to go.
Can you address some of the other major candidates throughout the country who have also been arrested, like Emily Goodford, Sheriff Laura Wells of California, Dr. Margaret Flowers, so that people will understand that it's an institutional problem and that we're treated with total contempt and that we're worth a lot better than this? Talk more about that, please.
Thank you, Lawrence. And you kind of made the point there. We can't do this alone. We can't do it for one campaign. And we do have some wonderful candidates. Margaret Flowers, that Lawrence mentioned. Dr. Margaret Flowers of Physicians for National Health Plan. She's running for Congress in Maryland. Gail McLaughlin is a city councilor in Richmond, California, and has been really creating historic policy on a number of fronts, including suing the banks around predatory mortgages and delivering these mortgages back to, using eminent domain to seize these mortgages and deliver them back to homeowners who are about to be dispossessed of their homes. And I should name also Shama Sawant, who's actually a socialist in Seattle, who established the first $15 an hour minimum wage in Seattle, which was then taken up by Los Angeles and San Francisco, and then now in New York State. So we are rising up strong. When Eugene Debs ran for president in the early 1900s as a socialist candidate, he never got more than 2 or 3 or 4%, but he helped inspire hundreds of people to run on the Socialist Party, the Progressive, the Farm Labor, independent, non-corporate parties who began to win local office and change policy at the local level. So thank you, Lawrence, for pointing that out.
Let me talk about your for just a second.
Oh, yeah.
Sure. And look, an awful lot of you will see Green Party candidates on your ballot this year. We have 9 candidates running. We have 8 running for state assembly all across the state. 1 running for Freeholder in Bergen County. And we had some real good news just yesterday. Our candidate up in the 26th, what are you, in the 24th? Steve Zielinski?
He's in the 24th.
He's in the 24th, okay. Up in the northern part of the state, named is Ken Collins. He was just endorsed this week by the Sierra Club. And for us, that's really big to get endorsed by the Sierra Club. So we were very proud of that.
Speaking of wins like that, do people know about Vice, Vice TV? So this is an HBO, it's like sort of, I'm told this is the source of news for people under 30. So we did an interview for Vice early on, and they were like, wow, this is so like totally awesome. They contacted us 2 weeks ago to say that they wanted to cover us like one of the mainstream candidates because they thought our voice was really important in this election. And they are going to embed a TV crew with us down in New Orleans, actually, as part of the Katrina. And I'll mention one other, which is Larry King. I did Larry King Live the other day, and at the end of it, he said, well, you know, this is really important. We're going to keep coming back and cover you early and often in this race because we think your voice is important. And for the first time, they paired us, because they had 2 candidates on the show, they paired us as Greens, not with the Libertarians. He said, I'm going to, you know, when we concluded our interview, he said, okay, so now I'm going to bring on another candidate. And I assumed it was going to be Gary Johnson. It turned out, no, it was not the Libertarians. It was actually one of the Democratic Party candidates. Whose name I don't remember. The guy who's sort of way down there. But it was the first time that we were actually paired with the Democrats and not sort of put over on the margin. So, times are changing. Yeah, okay. What's your policy on Israel? Okay, on Israel, we have a problem. We have a problem. And the Netanyahu government is guilty of war crimes. And there's really not much question about it. Well, and this is, and I can talk to you afterwards if you want to know more details about this, but the Netanyahu government, put it this way, there are human rights violations on both sides, but the violations by the Netanyahu government are so massively oversized relative to the violations by Hamas or the Palestinians. I mean, there's just no comparison. And there are thousands and thousands of innocent civilians who've been slaughtered over the last several invasions. And those invasions have been part of a provocative policy of occupation. So the occupation and the continued incursions in building and housing and all that is, these are all violations of international law. And so it's very important that they be rectified. Right now the U.S. actually sponsors the Israeli military to the tune of $8-9 million a day. So we have to look seriously at this policy that we are financing. And this is not just a problem on the world stage and a problem in the Middle East, but this is a problem for Israel and for Jews in Israel who need to come to a peaceful accord with their neighbors. Luckily, it's not rocket science how to do that. And there are grassroots human rights groups in Israel, as well as on the Palestinian side, that have been very, very successful, actually, in building trust and building relationships and building confidence and articulating this agenda. Right now, Israel has an apartheid government. And the Arabic members of Israel do not have citizen rights. They may be called citizens, but they don't have citizen rights. So there are really major human rights abuses that are going on. And in my campaign, we've basically said we need a even-handed policy that's not just looking at the Netanyahu government. We also need to look at Egypt and Saudi Arabia, where we are likewise sponsoring governments that are in violation of human rights and which we are arming, and those arms are being used in a horrific way. So we're basically saying we need to go back to the drawing board on our foreign policy. We need a foreign policy that's based on human rights and international law and diplomacy, not on economic and military domination, which unfortunately has been U.S. policy up until now. All right, so over here, 1, 2, and then 3. Okay.
Yeah, we think that the Israeli lobby, should they be registered as a foreign lobby organization, as a foreign organization, they should be registered as such?
Yes. And let me say that AIPAC, the Israeli lobby, basically, is flying in 700 people right now to Washington, D.C. to lobby Congress to oppose the Iran deal. 700 people they are flying in. What kinds of grassroots organizations can afford that budget? This is outrageous. And they're dedicated to spending $40 million on TV advertising right now. And most freshman congressmen and women